in recessions, in economic downturns, what is the role of advertising? And I think we've touched on really interestingly, Facebook, and to a lesser extent with a rosier outlook, ones like Google, are in different positions within consumer behavior right now. They see themselves playing different roles. So therefore, they're going to have a different view slightly on how the economy is performing.
Welcome to Punchy by Rival, where we take the gloves off to share the hard-hitting realities of the challenger marketing world. Each week, we'll break down the buzz and cut through the BS, the top stories and trends to tell you what you really need to know and do differently to grow your brand and career. All right, look at the smoothness of that transition. Third time's the charm, right? So,
a national broadcast, that intro.
Yeah, exactly. To the millions of people watching, thank you for your time. All right, Jenna has had some train delays on the subway in New York, but she says that she is literally walking in the building, so she should be here in a second. Lance, how are you doing? Do you want to give a quick intro and hello?
Hi. I'm very awkward at these things. I'm Lance Koenig. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Havas in Chicago. Recently, I've been here for about 2 months, so don't interrogate me too much on what's going on in Chicago or Havas just yet, although I do have some emerging thoughts. But was at the Martin Agency for 4 years before. Know Eric from a previous live. Excited to chat this morning or this evening or wherever you are, whatever time it is.
What are your thoughts on deep dish pizza? Because we got into quite an argument about this a couple weeks ago.
It is very polarizing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is. So I dig it. I mean, I prefer a thin crust pizza, and actually there is another pizza that rarely gets talked about that is a worthy contender, and that is Detroit style pizza. I don't know if you've ever had Detroit style pizza. I'm hardly the expert, so anybody who's a Detroit style pizza expert, please forgive me if I
got to get them on the show.
If I'm butchering this, but it is. So it's, it's famous for being in a rectangular shape. It is a sourdough, and it's a very crispy crust bottom, but it's like a sourdough bread that kind of is crunchy throughout, like the crust around the edges, but has a nice, soft, delicious middle. And then the sauce tends to be a little bit more savory. Then, lots of pizzas kind of run, or sauces run a little sweeter. So it's delicious. But deep dish, I dig. The thing is,
thank you.
People talk about deep dish being soggy, but if you go to, am I freezing up?
Not if you do it right. Nope.
Exactly. If you go to, the standards here, Illuminati's or Giordano's, it's a crispy bottom. And it's really delicious. But if it's soggy, then gross. It's just like bread. Hi, Jenna.
I'm 4 minutes late, and this is this is what happens. We come in and spew blasphemy about pizza.
I'm sorry. Before the summer break, we got to get it in.
We thought if we kept saying deep dish over and over again, you would appear.
I would just appear and magically appear. Yeah. No. Blame the F train. Yeah.
Jenna,
the F train is not a euphemism. I literally take the F train into work.
Could be both. It could be both.
It could be. But in this case, it was the train.
I'm glad you made it. You're back in the Outback Steakhouse. Jenna Dubose, how is your warehouse in Vancouver? Do we think the power is going to stay on today?
The power is going to stay on. I'm in Gibson's, Vancouver, in British Columbia. I guess it's not really Vancouver. It's more British Columbia. In this wonderful warehouse, which does not photograph well, but does look like it's great in person. On video, I imagine it looks like a VFW lodge somewhere in Arkansas. But
you look like you're in a bunker.
Yeah, it looks like you've been taken hostage in our.
This is a media bunker. I've been instructed by people to tell you I am fine, but do not look for me. So,
all right, let's get into it. So we got 3 stories to get through today, and then as we were talking about before we press record, want to dig into a little bit the Havas Meaningful Brands survey, which we talk about all the time, and we just so happen to have the Chief Strategy Officer from Havas here today. But before we get into that, 3 stories. So the first is about the global ad spending slowdown from Digiday. Next, also from Digiday, is Apple is building a demand side platform. No surprise to anyone there. And then lastly, from Ad Age, why Metaverse marketing is bullshit. A Gen Zer explains what brands are doing wrong. So first story, to be honest with you, there's not too much interesting in the story itself, and probably nothing new that people haven't read about or heard already with earnings reports from the big tech platforms that came out a couple of weeks ago. Basically, it seems like there is going to be a slowdown, at least in digital ad spending. So I think the conversation here should be, one, if there's any interesting insights based on what people are hearing and what people are seeing out there. But more importantly, how should brands be thinking about doing things differently, if at all, given this news and these headwinds? Lance, I'm going to start with you.
Well, it's confusing right now. You know what I mean? As the economic reality in the US is equally confusing, where there's signs that things are strong and good, but then you've got inflation that creates those pressures. And I think that ad spending reflects a little bit of that confusion. And it changes, pretty fast and frequently. But if you listen to Meta, we're going to see a slowdown because they're seeing a slowdown in their revenues, right? But Amazon and TikTok are both projecting pretty significant increases. And so I'd love to get your guys' thoughts on this. Like you're far more closer, certainly, Eric, historically to digital than I am. But in terms of like a hard right or making a significant change, it feels like there's some things to unpack within that. Meta is facing a kind of a new world, a new kind of relationship with consumers that they're trying to navigate and figure out as people love TikTok, and the relationship and the gravitational pull feels like it's more there than perhaps them. And I'm offering that up without a lot of data, but those are just observations and, just being a consumer, things that I'm witnessing. I don't hear people talk much about Facebook right now. All the trends are happening on TikTok. That's where the momentum absolutely is. And so when I take that personal kind of view and interaction with these platforms and put that against the headline, I'm asking myself, is your downturn because of the economy, or is your downturn because your relationship with consumers is weakening? And for me, that is compounded by 2 years ago, I remember, I'm not on Facebook, just to be, perfectly transparent. I stopped being on Facebook in 2018. And we can have that be a separate show. But at the time I was like, I'm curious if others are going to do this. Am I joining a club? Am I the outlier? Am I just a social outcast for choosing to do this? But the number of people, the percentage of people at any given time who are entertaining leaving Facebook or closing their Facebook account hovers at 45%. That is a dangerous number. I mean, if 45% of your consumers at any one moment are thinking about quitting you, you just have to wonder where this is going to go. I would love to know the data that Meta has behind that. But, as an outsider and as just a strategist who tries to understand how brands connect with consumers, that kind of a stat would terrify me. So going back to the ad spend question, is it truly economics? As we're trying to figure out the recession, or are we in a recession, or where things are going, and it's ad spending is continuing to be forecast as good versus what the big tech companies are reporting. And we should be very specific that really is Facebook and Google to a much less extent. Google's numbers are pretty healthy, it looks, but just based on what I read this morning. So yeah, what do you guys think?
It does seem, I will call out one comment from the article that mentioned it seems like a two-track online ad economy emerged over the last quarter, with advertisers shoring up search ad spend, to your point, Dubose, of how Google's seems to be doing okay through this. And that's as a critical part of these brands' media strategies, while cutting other areas like online display and social media. So I think there is that when it comes to Google, probably Amazon. And actually, it's interesting more and more the stats and conversation around TikTok as a search channel, particularly for younger generations. That being more of, I know Jenna agrees wholeheartedly with me on this, that ends up being seen as more of kind of like the core media budget that needs to get protected at all costs, whereas Facebook and display, particularly with the headwinds and the rising CPAs and just costs of being on that platform, is the easier thing to get cut. But the other thing for me, and maybe I'm going to steal something that Dubose would say, because he has said this a few times already, it seems like we're kind of talking our way into this to a certain extent, especially when the economic data is gray at best. It's not black and white that we are going into a recession, and yet everybody's talking about what should we do because we're in a recession. So I think there is a little bit of the groupthink and the bandwagon happening here. And I think there's always an opportunity to buck the trend if and when it makes sense for your business and your realities. But there is a lot of data out there because so many of these ad platforms are based on supply and demand. There is a lot of data out there of if everyone starts to pull out, if you have the opportunity to go in to invest more, there's a lot of growth opportunity there for you. Jenna?
Well, quickly, I was going to offer up that I think we're going to get, like, I'm not an economist, so please do not take any financial advice from me. I think that in 2 months, they're going to say we were in a recession.
We are in a recession. We are by all definitions of a recession.
No, not by all definitions.
By the financial regulatory authority definition of a recession, which is 2 consecutive quarters of negative growth, we are in a recession. We're not talking our way into that.
But
that's negative. That's negative growth.
I mean, but it's the jobs. It's all markers are not negative. It's just a contraction, which is recession related. Like, my dog got up for this. She's very opinionated on this. Keep going.
Dogs love macroeconomic forces. It's a well-known fact.
I think we are very clearly in a recession. I think that consumer confidence is low. Inflation is devastatingly bad and is being hidden by the way that, like, we choose to report on it. I mean, food and fuel and all these other things are really terrible. And I think that the softening in ad spend is a reflection of realities, right? It is a reflection of realities that consumers are simply not spending as much. The jobs report, the majority of jobs that were added were part-time jobs. Full-time labor participation, like, decreased. And again, like, the overall labor participation rate decreased as part of the July jobs report. Obviously, some of marketers pulling back is as a reflection of a reality that the economy is not in a good place, and not just in the US. The UK is facing, kind of the same things. Those are the countries that we happen to be closest to, but this is a global thing.
Yesterday's markers start to tell us a different story.
But one day is not the months and months of seven consecutive months of inflation data that we've seen on this. But again, the point is not.
But this is last month. Inflation.
The July. Inflation is still up 8.5% versus a year ago. Food and fuel costs are 30% higher than a year ago. And just because it came in at 8.5% versus an expected 8.7% is not, woo, this is all great. Like, we're doing fantastic.
It's a reversal in trend. It's an indication, because we've been on 24 months of month after month increases. So for it to be flat is a tremendous mark. Now, again, I'm not an economist. And gas prices are down, and
fuel prices are up, especially like before winter's coming. But like, not to quibble about the specifics. Clearly, regardless of if it's a minor, like, reversal in trend, if we're saying that there's been a really, really long time that consumers have been suffering from a lot of these things, and I think that we're seeing that every day. I can't get out of the grocery store for less than $50 these days, but obviously some of advertisers pulling back spend is as a reflection of that. I think that, Lance, your point is correct, that obviously that there's a nuanced picture to this, that Amazon is seeing increases in spend. People are you're protecting their Google and their search spend and a couple other things. But probably at least some of these advertisers that are pulling back, because we've had clients obviously that have said, hey, you know what, we've looked at the economic conditions and said, I'm sorry, unfortunately we got to cut our marketing budgets for these things. But I do think, like I say, that the interesting part of that is that, when we get to crisis, it does force people to kind of revisit, what their priorities are. And the more interesting part of this, I think, is the reordering of priorities. The only other thing I'll say is that TikTok stat is referred to. There is 1 hour in the day. There is 1 hour in the day where a specific demographic over lunch spends more time searching on TikTok than they do on Google. It is not that TikTok has overtaken Google, full stop, as a search engine for Gen Z. There is 1 hour a day over lunch where Gen Z spends more time searching on TikTok than they do on Google. But anyways.
The fact that they're using it as a search engine is the headline to me. It's not whether or not it's an hour or who. The fact that it has entered that space is a fascinating trait.
But hasn't YouTube been there for a long time? And when we talk about YouTube as the second largest search engine in the world.
We accept that. And I think it's a relatively new thing for TikTok. So even if it hasn't completely surpassed, it's interesting that it's growing in that direction. I think that's
even completely surpassed. That there is only one very specific.
I don't think your point supports your position. The main point for me is I think a lot of Here's the main point for me. I think a lot of, if you can curl, are you going for a weightlifting analogy here?
If I can curl 20 pounds more than you in one bicep curl, am I stronger than you?
But that's not the point. The point is not. The point is that most marketers do not think of TikTok as a search channel right now. And maybe they should, or maybe they should go do their own research and actually read the articles and look at the data of how much of their audience is using it, but it might be more than they think it is.
Well, I think that's the point though, right? Like there is a context to it that is interesting beyond a very snappy headline. I think to Jenna's point, for 15 minutes over lunch, DoorDash is the most effective search engine on earth if we're going by this usage. Yeah. And so I think it's just contextually, you have to consider it. And I think it goes back to the wider point, right? Like I think, to Jenna's macroeconomic point, we are by almost all indicators in a lot of the G8 markets in a recession. I think the interesting thing is, like all recessions and more in this one, there are different fates that businesses are going to have. Not every business is going to be affected equally, just like every person isn't going to be affected equally. To Jenna's point, like inflation and grocery prices is an interesting one when you start to think about consumer confidence. I couldn't get out of the grocery store last week for more than $80, and that was because I was at Whole Foods. But I think, down to the idea of, how brands are going to be affected, how the economy is going to go. I think there is a wider point here, which is in recessions, in economic downturns, what is the role of advertising? And I think we've touched on really interestingly, Facebook and to a lesser extent with a rosier outlook, ones like Google are in different positions within consumer behavior right now. They see themselves playing different roles. So therefore, they're going to have a different view slightly on how the economy is performing. I mean, don't get me started on the idea that basically you can inexcuse kind of your position in the market and current market performance by just yelling economy, which I think is a little bit of what Facebook's doing. But I think there is a point here that, is advertising just there to capture existing demand in these channels, or is advertising there to help foster and create demand in certain instances? And I think this is going to be a question a lot of advertisers, a lot of media platforms are going to have to consider over the next months and years as we wrestle with either, a continuing recession or the hangover of believing we're still in one when the factors change.
I would just build on that with it's a relatively well-established fact that the advertisers who continue to spend in recessions come out on top on the other side. So our advice is always, unless you are in a crisis situation where the money has to be pulled back to apply to operations in other places, spend, because you're going to be rewarded for it on the other side. And there's some really good brands. I think Mondelez, who at the top of the list, knows that and tends to invest in those kind of recessionary times, and their brands just kind of continue to not only have the affinity but the sales. So
I love that research, Lance, but I'm always really curious. I've read I remember reading like some of the excerpts because that is a really well established fact. But I'm always really curious because it's also, there's also been some pretty compelling stuff that's come out lately. Again, that it's the larger brands that will tend to see the highest ROI from like digital ad spend. That essentially the more that you spend, the higher your returns are, and so it'll tend to be the largest brands and the largest companies that can already afford to keep advertising. Of course, Apple can keep advertising. Of course, Mondelez can keep advertising. Whatever, these are multi-billion-dollar companies. And I always wonder, I really love to, and I should look for it. See what the segmentation is by like market cap size as to how well like those brands do like after a recession, because it is true. But then I always wonder how does that fare for companies and brands of different sizes?
Yeah, I've never seen it based on company size. It's always return on ad spend. You know what I mean? Like you just continue to see a healthy return on that investment. With that in mind, the fundamentals of strategy remain in place. Do you have a good strategy? Are you focused on the right consumer? Is your product compelling? If those things aren't in place, you can't spend your way through a recession and come out on top. Yeah. But your question is a good one. I suspect that small businesses who've been smart, in fact, I know it because I've looked at the numbers. Those who have invested in digital and have been smart over the past 3 years actually have grown. And you've seen a lot of small business transformation at a time when people thought it was the death of small businesses. So it's a great question. And I don't know of any study, I'll look for it, that answers your question.
All right, I'm going to move us on because we spent 20 minutes on the first story. So we're going to have to go with a bit of a rapid fire responses to the next two stories. Apple is building a demand-side platform. This is a report from Digiday. The company is building a demand-side platform if recent job listings are to be believed. Specifically, it's looking for a senior manager for a DSP in its ads platform business. Whoever gets the job will be asked to, quote, drive the design of the most privacy-forward, sophisticated demand-side platform possible. It remains unclear if the intended DSP is geared towards serving ads solely on Apple's owned and operated properties, likely not, such as the App Store, or even on third-party properties such as the mobile web. Jenna, I'm going to let you start with this one. Can you give a quick definition of what a DSP is, the role that it serves within a marketer's ecosystem, and what your thoughts are on Apple starting to build this out?
Can you make it a folksy metaphor as well about a DSP? Explain it to me like
No, I used the
weightlifting metaphors.
weightlifting
More
one. I used the
weightlifting metaphors.
weightlifting
Keep
one.
it.
Is it
keep
a curl
consistent
bar?
through the episode?
No, I should have come up with a better way. Anyways, a DSP stands for a demand side platform. So essentially, this is the tool that Apple is going to use to collect their inventory and then make it saleable programmatically to people who want to buy kind of their ad spots. They did this. I don't know if iAds. I don't think iAds was a DSP. That was a little bit before my time, kind of in the digital marketing world. But but Apple has ventured into the ads, the ad space before. And I will say, Apple search ads are like currently like this, not really a sleeper, but like Apple search ads are definitely like just like crushing now on the app installs, like inventory and like media buying side. Really great inventory Apple search ads. I think this is super interesting. I really scoff at the most privacy forward like DSP and a couple other things. I kind of like that Apple has occupied this like very like privacy forward space, and I think that a lot of their ad products will necessarily tend to be a little bit more like contextual in nature, like it's like Apple search ads, or again like some other placements that will tend to be around again contexts rather than like using kind of personal identifiers as kind of targeting, which is really interesting. But I think this is great. I am optimistic. I think that Apple's going to figure this out, maybe where they had a bit of a misstep like previously. Again, Apple search ads and some of their other ad products seem to be running well. But I definitely think, to the earlier point we were making about like, digital ad spend is doing different things in different places. I really see some of the other players that are not Facebook and Google, or even like to a lesser extent like Amazon and TikTok, like with some of the changes that are happening in privacy and targeting capabilities, to really start to bolster some of these types of offerings. Also, if I were the trade desk, I'd be very nervous. I'd be very nervous about this if I were the trade desk. Yeah.
Well said.
Was that all the stuff? I didn't do a weightlifting metaphor. Was that all the stuff I was supposed to say? I'll think of a weightlifting
You need a weightlifting metaphor. You need a DSP is like a squat rack.
I don't think so. I should have done a mule with a spinning wheel. There's a Tim Cook mule with a spinning wheel, something. I'll try to put it together.
When you think about it, think about it and come back.
Somebody else go. I'll think about it.
Tim Cook is like an overly energetic personal trainer. Yes, what he's saying is correct, but at the end of the day, he also needs to make money off of this. And I think that's really the way when we think about privacy. It's the same thing, right? Like at the end of the day, I think no one truly believed Apple woke up one day and went, oh my God, what we need to make is the world more private and advertising more respectful. But I do respect the idea that they found a market hole. They've owned it really well. They've built it into a strong USP for them, and something that I imagine the tracking data at some point said that people care about, but not enough to make it your thing. And now they've come ahead of the curve on it. I think it's interesting that we have a lot of conversations about consumers demanding more privacy from advertising. And while they do, I don't think a lot of them have been standing up and doing anything about it. And I think someone like Apple looking at it and going, we can make this much easier. And actually, if there's a privacy discussion, we're going to be the ones who kind of come out on top on that, I think is really powerful, because every tech company's tried to do it, and not every tech company can explain their privacy software, their privacy point of view, even internally, let alone externally, in a compelling way.
I agree with that. It's a massive topic around the world. I mean, on the heels of competitors being outed for selling all of your data and manipulating you and the algorithms that go with it, Apple's move a few years ago was genius. To be like, we're not going to do that. We don't do that. And this is an evolution and a natural next step for them to say, privacy matters. We're going to do this a little differently. So yeah, I think the world will respond to it. And I agree, it's not a surprise at all.
Also, I will say, like on a very practical note, this was just a reminder for me to actually like go into the App Store like UI because like as part of this announcement, they were like, "Hey, we're doing new ad placements within the App Store as part of like their Apple Search Ads offering." Which again, you should check out if the of the 20 people that listen, if any of you are app marketers, Apple Search Ads, 2 thumbs up. But they're adding new placements, like I said, like in some of the Today tabs and a couple other things, and like the experience is a lot like richer than like I actually remember it being. I don't know how much time people spend actually in the App Store placement, but like I said, I think that this is definitely part of like some of the larger moves Apple's making, and they seem to be so far pretty good, I think.
Sounds like we are largely positive on Apple building out their DSP. Last but not least, why metaverse marketing is bullshit. A Gen Zer explains what brands are doing wrong from Ad Age. So the gist of this episode, this article, I won't go and read it line by line, is basically a lot of what brands are doing is jumping on the bandwagon, which is something that we've talked about before. And actually, a lot of the quote unquote metaverse activations are not actually the metaverse. Just because you give somebody a VR experience, just because you've built them an NFT, just because you do something that you label as that does not mean that it's truly a metaverse activation. Dubose, I'm going to start with you on this. Do you think that metaverse marketing at this stage is bullshit?
I mean, it's total bullshit at this point. But I think I've got two things about this article I struggle with. A, why does it matter that the person is Gen Z? Unless everyone else here is collectively a grandfather that someone's grandchild has come around to the home to explain the internet to, which is really the tone I get off of this. And you know, aside from saying that we used to call lettuce victory cabbage, I don't really know why like an age difference thing here is interesting. And B, I think, you know, as far as the metaverse marketing bit goes, like, why can't we just be happy for a bit saying that you're in VR marketing or you're in digital experiential or you're in NFTs or you're in Web3? We just got the Web3 toy like 2 Christmases ago. You can't throw that away and then pick up something new from the store yet. You've got to use it until at least a wheel falls off. And I think, you know, for me, I think it does a disservice to actually a lot of the interesting things marketers are doing in digital marketing and experiential as that starts to blend between physical and digital, and the idea of Web3's opportunity by just layering another buzzword on top of it. And I think it's interesting that in this article, whereas we go, okay, metaverse is a bit bullshit, we then try to establish a lexicon underneath it of other little metaverses that we can cling to until we get the big metaverse. And I think as marketers, what we have to do, and like it's with all innovation, right, is to take stuff to our clients, to take stuff to consumers as experiences that we are rational, pragmatic, and excited about, but we approach it in firm footing. And I think this doesn't help anyone to just continue perpetuating the kind of, it's not really the metaverse isn't there yet. It's a really long ways off. And I think, you know, at the moment, let's just be content with using some of the language we have to deliver amazing experiences, the kind of things we want from the metaverse, but recognizing that, you know, we already have a language and a toolkit to deliver those now.
Amen. I mean, I would just add that the metaverse is actually, and I will quote James Watley, it is a gaming. I mean, it's individual gaming platforms. The metaverse, as we try to describe it, doesn't yet exist. But also, I love the perspective that he takes on what are you trying to do with the quote metaverse? Who do you think you're reaching? And what are the KPIs against it? Because if you're honest with yourself, you're reaching gamers. The people who are in Roblox and other places are gamers. Like, is that your audience? Is that strategically what you need to do? Because everything else is just a headline. You're just doing shit that's a stunt to get a headline, and it has distorted how people think about like marketing in the metaverse. There's that, the CMO article in Wall Street Journal that talked about, I don't remember what the number was, $5 billion by 2030 will be spent in the metaverse. And then the specifics that it's quoting are in-game purchases. You know what I mean? Like filters, you know, and other things that are completely about gaming or, you know, more broadly, just e-commerce. So,
but that's just it. Like, let's call a spade. The vast majority of everything that's happening here is for the headlines and for the awards and for the internal or industry accolades. It's not actually about the customer at the end of the day. Maybe I've been in this industry too long and maybe I'm a little bit too cynical, but that is the vast majority of what's happening. And like you say all the time, Dubose, a lot of it is we lose Jenna for a second. A lot of it
pulled
is
into the metaverse.
She's gone forever.
She's back from the metaverse.
a lot of it is a solution looking for a problem. It's the new shiny thing. And we've all been there. We worked in ad agencies. Like, this happens. These conversations happen. Hey, what's our metaverse strategy? Hey, how do we be the first mover on whatever this new platform is? So it's not a surprise that the metaverse marketing is bullshit. I think that it's only people inside the industry that are really talking about it at this point.
I agree. I mean, what's the stat that's accurate? Like only 20% can accurately describe what it is. You know, how many Americans even know what we're talking about?
I think the rule here has to be, if you weren't on Second Life, you can't talk about the metaverse right now. Like, I think it's back to the idea that if you didn't suffer
Okay,
through,
boomer. Okay, boomer. I'm gonna
this is
boomer
why the
you.
gens-
I
okay, fine, could
boomer.
be Roblox as well. But like, look, I think you have to suffer through some of the quasi virtual reality, polygonal like graphics experiences that were, you know, flogged as virtual reality before. Virtual reality was the thing people talked about in the 90s, Jenna. And then, you know, what we can get to from there is really, then you can enjoy the metaverse. But I think at the moment, it's just that idea. You can't hop to something else. We got to slog through the bits we've got now. And we're going to be there for a while.
Are we starting the metaverse swear jar? I know that we keep joking about it. Should we actually start one?
No, it was the cliche swear jar for every time Dubose uses the Mike Tyson punched in the face.
I like
joke.
that quote. I like to
I am so
Dubose's favorite philosopher. You just see him tee it up and then he knocks it down.
We're swapping from Mike Tyson to Mike Skinner. Everything from now on is going to be Streets quotes for 2 years. This is what you've done. Sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel is a train.
Amazing. Well, I propose that you get James on here because he has all kinds of, I think, money to add to your metaverse jar.
We will. I will do that. We actually need to build out our bookings for September. So I will do that. And I will message him and tell him that you are on. All right. So before we wrap up, I know that we're over on time, but if Lance, you can stay a couple minutes, I'd love to maybe just take 2-3 minutes to talk about meaningful brands. So this is a survey and a report that Havas does every year. Be curious, kind of, you know, you being relatively new to Havas, of course, you were aware of the survey and the topic of how do brands actually create meaning in consumers' lives before. But what are the biggest takeaways for you actually being on the inside, probably having a glimpse of like how these reports are made right now? What are the biggest takeaways for the audience from your perspective? And then maybe we can build on that a little bit.
The major things that I have so I, like you all, and I suspect a lot of marketers use that study, and there's a specific stat within that study that we pull out. We certainly did in my previous lives. And it's one that Erica knows familiar with, that it's, you know, it moves, but right now it's 75% of brands could disappear tomorrow and nobody would notice. You know, there's just a lightning rod of oh shit, am I meaningful? Is my brand relevant in today's world? You know what I mean? That obviously conjures up and asks and begs the question for. I've never used it much beyond that. Getting in and seeing kind of the mechanics of it, it's actually a business construct. Like, meaningful brands is a proven approach and kind of a strategy with numbers like meaningful brands outperform their competitors. Meaningful brands outperform the stock market. Meaningful brands tend to enjoy greater loyalty, purchase intent. Like, there's metrics underneath all of that clarify that this is not just an interesting concept and one that's, I think, intuitive to most people, but rather it's a business proposition. It's a way to think about how your brand should go to market. And in a world like, just coming off of the metaverse conversation, in our world where breakthrough is kind of everything, where we talk about the need to get talked about in buzz, that often is without any sort of understanding or grounding in what a brand should be about. It literally is just great headlines, get people talking to you. And the fundamentals of brand and brand building are kind of secondary to that. This rather puts meaningful brands as basically approach to build your brand, create the buzz, get people talking about you, but in a way that brings together just a more meaningful approach. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to go deeper next time, but there is a great deal of great data underneath it. If that makes sense.
Amazing.
That is my first time talking about that in a public way. Have me back because I'll refine it.
Yeah, definitely. When does the report get released every year?
In the fall.
Okay, great. Maybe we could do that. Actually, maybe we could do a scratch episode on that if you're up for it. I think that would be great. All right, we are well over on time, so I think we're going to leave it there. No time for rants or raves today, unless anybody had a really, really good one. Otherwise, we'll just...
Rave.
What is it?
The Facebook chatbot AI talking about how shitty Facebook is. Rave.
I didn't see that.
Absolutely hilarious. So
I
funny.
mean, All right, you gotta
I'll
send it
build
to
on
me.
that because I do love the idea that you kind of go, as chatbots get more sentient, the thing they're not going to have is social nuance. So I think the awkward things chatbots are going to tell us over the next 10 years about ourselves is going to be absolutely incredible. There'll definitely be some kind of cyber rage kind of like social movement thing of people freaking out when their chatbot actually told them they're a terrible person or that they look funny.
We do not talk enough about how the Turing test, like depending on how smart the human is on the other end of the Turing test, like really like is going to depend on whether or not like somebody can tell it's an AI based on how smart they are. I'm really looking forward to the consequences of our actions. I'm sure that they won't be severe.
So it's less that an AI could pass as a human and more they'll probably start passing as awkward humans that just tell you uncomfortable truths.
Or no, that or like that Google engineer who was convinced that his AI was a real person, and it's like, no, buddy, you're just dumber than that AI is the real
or
problem.
you just watched that Joaquin Phoenix movie Her a few too many times.
Think about that all the time.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to leave it there. We are going to be off for the next 3 weeks on a bit of a summer break, but we will be back September 8th, I think it is. And we will get James Watley on for the fall. Thanks for the suggestion, Lance. All right. Have a good one. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Punchy is a production of Rival. We are a growth consultancy that builds challenger brands, strategies, and capabilities to disrupt categories. If you want to learn more about us, check out wearerival.com. If you want to connect with Jenna, Dubose, or myself, email us at media@wearerival.com or find us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe, share with anyone you think might enjoy it, and leave us a review. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.